You know, people think long haul driving is just point A to point B, a job. You load up, you set off, you get there, easy. But it's not like that. Not really. It's hours of white lines blurring under your wheels. The steady hum of the engine becoming a kind of background heartbeat. The cab becomes your world. The dash lights glowing dim orange. The wind buffeting the mirrors. The low rumble under your feet. Sometimes it's almost comforting. There are stretches of road in this country, especially at night, that feel like they could go on forever. You hit a certain point and you stop feeling like you're going somewhere. You feel like the road is keeping you. It's usually the small hours when it happens. Maybe 2, 3 in the morning. That dead time when the rest of the world is asleep and you're just moving through. There's a loneliness to it that you really can't explain unless you've been there. Towns turn into shadows. Villages flicker past without a single light on. The only sign of life is the occasional fox darting across the road. And even they stop looking real after a while. It was one of those southbound, nothing special when I first felt it. I'd been on the motorway for hours. The kind of hours where you can't remember the last time you saw anything. The sky felt flat, moonless, black, where you can't see where the land ends and the clouds begin. Tarmac ahead of me was just a ribbon in the beams of my headlights. I had the radio off, not by choice, mind you. The thing had been playing up for weeks, cutting out mid-song and leaving me in dead air. So it was just me, the hum of the tyres, the occasional clink of my thermos rolling slightly in the cup holder. That's when I noticed the sign. Not road signs. Those are normal. I mean, the absence of them. You get used to seeing markers every so often. Distances, junctions, fuel stops ahead. But for miles, and I mean miles, there was nothing. Just black hedgerows on either side. The road stretching on and on. No exit numbers, no speed cameras, no reflective chevrons. And then I realized something else. The road was too smooth. Not a single pothole. Not even joints. Not even that faint change in surface when you pass over a bridge or underpass. It was like the whole motorway had been freshly laid in one perfect, unbroken strip. At first, I thought maybe they'd resurfaced it recently. But then I remember driving that exact route the week before, and it wasn't like this then. I kept going. What else could I do? There's no pulling over on a motorway in the middle of the night. Not unless you want a copper knocking on your window. And here's the thing. I started feeling watched. Not in the there's a car behind me sense. It was bigger than that, broader. Like the road itself was paying attention. Like the black hedgerows on either side weren't hedgerows at all, but something crouched there, perfectly still, waiting for me to notice. I shook it off, rolled my shoulders, sipped lukewarm coffee. But the feeling stayed. It stayed so long that I started counting the seconds between the white dashes, just to keep my mind from wandering too far. Then something strange happened. The timing changed. Not me. the road. The dashes started coming slightly closer together. The rhythm I'd been keeping in my head, it sped up, just a fraction, but enough for me to notice. That was the first time I thought, something's wrong here. I glanced at the clock, 2:40 in the morning. I'd been on this stretch for far too long without hitting a junction. I told myself maybe I'd zoned out and missed a sign. It happens. But the unease sat there in my gut like a stone. Eventually, finally, I saw headlights ahead, another lorry. The relief washed over me like I'd just seen another human being in weeks at sea. I put my foot down a little, just enough to catch up. But as I got closer, I realised it wasn't moving. At least it didn't look like it was moving. The tail lights were glowing, but there was no spray coming off its tyres. The whole thing was too still, too perfect, like a model sitting on a shelf. I eased back, gave it distance, and then the lights just blinked out. No fade, no brake, just gone. And the road ahead was completely empty. After that, lorry just vanished. And I mean vanished, like it was never there. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it had pulled off at a junction. I just didn't see it. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks. That's what happens when you're tired, right? You start seeing shapes in the shadows, colours in the dark. But the more I drove, the less that made sense. Because there was still no exits. Normally, I'd have seen at least 2 service stations by now. Maybe a lorry or 2. But it was just this endless black strip, winding on between those hedgerows. Every now and then, the lights would pick up a tree beyond them. Bare skeletal branches stretched up like bony hands. I started to notice that the trees never seemed to change. Each one I passed looked exactly like the last. I checked the clock again. 3:06. I swear it had been 3:06 the last time I looked too. Now, I'm not an anxious man by nature. The road's my home. Has been for years. I've done overnight runs through fog so thick I couldn't see the bonnet. Taken ice slick roads in the Highlands where nothing but grit and luck has kept me on the track. I've seen weird things before. Everyone in this line of work has a story. But this was different. I tried the radio again, thinking maybe some music would break the mood. It crackled into life for all of 2 seconds before cutting to static. Not just white noise though. This had patterns in it, like voices trying to push through. Too muffled to understand, but too human to ignore. I turned it off. My hands were tighter on the wheel than I realized. The road dipped, then rose again. Same smooth tarmac, same hedgerows. No signs, no markings except the dashes. And here's where it got really strange. The dashes were getting longer. Not the space between them, the actual painted lines. They stretched on further into my headlights, like someone had decided the road needed stripes the size of coffins. My stomach twisted when I realised I was avoiding looking directly at them. It's a weird thing when your own brain tells you not to look at something. I rolled down the window for some fresh air. The cold hit me immediately. Sharper than it should have been for that time of year. I leaned out slightly as I drove, just to hear something other than the engine. Nothing though. No wind through the trees. No distant cars. Not even the faint hiss of tires on tarmac. It was like I was driving through a world that had been switched off. That's when I decided I needed to stop. Service station or not, I'd pull over at the next safe spot, get out, stretch my legs, clear my head. But the road had other ideas. Mile after mile, there was nothing. Not a shoulder, not a verge, nothing wide enough to stand on. And the longer I drove, the more I started to think maybe there never would be. You'd think after all these years behind the wheel, I'd be used to the long stretches. The bits of road where the monotony settles over you like a heavy coat. Normally, I'd flick the radio on, sing along to something stupid, maybe sip at a coffee I knew was too hot just to jolt myself awake. But not this time. The longer I drove, the more I realized there was no settling into this stretch. There was no rhythm to fall into. The road wasn't just long, it was wrong. Every bend was the same bend. Every straight looked exactly like the last. The hedgerows on either side weren't just similar, they were identical. I could have sworn I saw the same knot in the wood of a fence post 3 times in a row. I actually slowed down the 3rd time I passed it, leaning toward the glass to see if I was imagining things. Same knot, same crack running from it like a little lightning bolt. I told myself maybe there was a whole row of identical posts I just never noticed. But deep down I knew better. It wasn't repetition like deja vu. It was repetition like a scratched record, the needle catching in the same groove over and over. I thought, pulling over again, but I still hadn't found a spot. The road kept curling, just enough that there was never a straight section with enough room to stop. The hedgerows pressed in closer, like they were leaning towards me. The clock said 3:06 again. It always said 3:06. I started thinking about time, how it passes without you realizing, how it stretches and contracts depending on where you are. Then I thought about how easy it would be to get lost if time stopped moving at all. The cab felt hotter, so I reached for the window. It was already down. I can't remember lowering it. Cold air was coming in, but it wasn't the kind of cold that made your skin prickle. It was dense, heavy, almost damp. Smelled faintly of earth. Not fresh soil either. More like the smell you get when you dig deep into the ground. Somewhere in the distance though, I couldn't say which direction, I thought I heard something faint. Not exactly a voice, but the shape of a voice. The way a murmur can catch your ear before you actually hear the words. I turned the radio back on without really thinking about it. Static again. Same broken patterns as before. They were faint, but if I listened closely, I could almost make out syllables. Not whole words, just fragments. I left it on for a minute, telling myself maybe it was picking up late night foreign station. But I knew better. I reached for my coffee. It was empty. I could have sworn I'd barely taken 2 sips. When I put it back in the cup holder, I realized my hands were trembling. I told myself it was just fatigue, but I wasn't tired, not in the usual sense. I felt alert, wide awake, in a way that made my skin itch. The dashes on the road were longer again. Not just long, stretched, pulled out. The edges looked frayed in my headlights, like the paint had been dragged across the tarmac instead of applied. And the further I drove, the more I had the sense that there was no end to this road. It wasn't leading anywhere. It was just holding me. That's the thing I couldn't shake. The idea that the road didn't care about taking me somewhere. It just wanted me to keep driving. And maybe if I kept going long enough, I'd forget where I'd been trying to go in the first place. That's when I first noticed it. Just a subtle flicker in the corner of my eye. A pale shimmer that didn't belong. I glanced over towards the passenger seat, half expecting to see the usual empty space. But for a heartbeat, something was there. A shape, faint, almost translucent, but undeniably human in form. She was small, haunched like she was trying to stay out of sight, and her hair hung in tangled wet strands across her face. The kind of hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed for years, clinging to her pale skin. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes. I was sure it was exhaustion twisting my mind. But when I looked back, she was still there. A ghostly passenger just sitting silently beside me. Head bowed, shoulders trembling just slightly as if she was shivering in the cold. I swallowed hard, fighting the sudden tightness in my chest. "You're not real," I muttered to myself. But my voice sounded hollow, even to my own ears. I glanced down at my wheel, trying to steady my shaking hands. But the feeling of her presence only grew heavier. Like a weight pressing against my ribs, making it harder to breathe. Every time I stole another glance, she shifted. Her eyes occasionally flickering up, meeting mine with hollow, empty sockets. No emotion, just an endless, chilling emptiness. The strangest thing was that she never spoke. No whispers, no cries, just silence. But that silence screamed into the darkness of the cab. At one point, I reached out, half hoping to break the spell, to find nothing but cold, empty air. But my hand passed straight through her like smoke. I jerked back, heart pounding. This wasn't sleep deprivation or loneliness. This was something else. I forced my eyes back on the road, but the world outside was no comfort. It was like the road itself was bending, warping around me, trying to pull me deeper in some cruel loop. The woman stayed with me, her presence bleeding into every corner of the truck cab. At times, she looked almost curious, tilting her head as if studying me, weighing me. Other times, she seemed resigned, like she'd been trapped there for longer than time could measure. I tried to focus on the hum of the engine, the rhythm of the wheels, anything to anchor myself. But the weight of her eyes never left me. It was cold, oppressive. It made my skin crawl. Like the breath of a long-forgotten nightmare pressing down on my soul. I told myself it was a hallucination, a trick of the mind caused by exhaustion, isolation. But my gut knew better. I wasn't alone. And whatever this was, it wasn't going anywhere. The night dragged on. I knew she was keeping me here. The engine wouldn't die. The brakes wouldn't respond like they should. The whole time. Watching. A slight smile. Knowing smile. Hollow eyes staring back at me from the corner of the cab. I shouted at her, "What do you want from me? Let me go." Nothing but silence in return. The temperature inside the cab had plummeted. My breath fogged the windows. Every attempt to leave was met with a new barrier. She was keeping me here. I knew it. There was no escape. No help. Just the endless night. And a ghost that didn't want me to leave. Hours blurred into one another. Each moment heavier than the last. I was running out of will. Of strength. The ghost beside me never left. A silent passenger who seemed to feed on my fear. Tightening the grip of the endless road. It wasn't just my mind playing tricks anymore. I knew I was trapped. That the presence was not just haunting me. It was holding me prisoner inside my own truck. Forcing me to drive. No matter how tired I was. How much I begged for rest. The wheel wouldn't let go. My hands gripped it as if by some unseen force. Muscles burning but unwilling to release. Every glance to the passenger seat reminded me that I wasn't alone. That cold, hollow-eyed stare of a thin, worn face. Eerie, knowing smile. She didn't just want me to drive. She needed me to stay. To keep moving. Like it was some twisted ritual. But then just as my eyes began to flutter, just from exhaustion, something changed. A faint light crept up on the horizon, bleeding orange and pink across the dark sky. The first hint of dawn. With it came a strange calm. The air lightened. The heavy weight pressing down on my chest began to lift. I dared to glance sideways, but the seat beside me was empty. The cold presence, the cruel smile, the hollow eyes, they were all gone. I didn't dare to believe it at first. But through the windshield, the world slowly sharpened. And lit up by the soft glow of dawn was a sign. That's just a service station. But a place where I could stop, rest, escape. As I reached for the gear shift, a distant rumble grew louder. The unmistakable sound of another lorry. It passed by, its headlights briefly lighting up the road ahead. I reminded that the world outside this nightmare was still moving, still alive. I didn't know if the ghost was truly gone, or if the sun was just holding it back for a while. But for the first time all night, hope. The road had almost claimed me, but now I was finally free.